It's wonderful to be here with you all. My name is Amy Cubbage, and I'm president of the North Carolina Partnership for Children and the Smart Start Network, and we're thrilled to be here with all of you. Thank you for taking time out of your busy lives to pause and join us for a wonderful panel discussion on exploring national, state, and local workforce supports for early childhood professionals. And this is our last of 3 featured sessions that we've had following 4 wonderful days of sessions as an intensive conference. And then we have a weekly Thursday featured session with experts from across our early childhood field. I am thrilled today that we have a moderator from the Center for the Study of Childcare Employment, an organization that is near and dear to my heart as a former early childhood teacher. That was my first job, my favorite job, and also the hardest job I ever had. I got quickly involved at that time, was living on the West Coast in the Worthy Wages movement. And it's exciting now to have Marissa Schleber on, who is the Senior Policy and Research Associate at the center, and to think back to those days that I was on the West Coast, where you are now, Marissa, now in North Carolina, which was another leader, co-leader in that movement for what we always shouted through the streets in those early days of the Worthy Wages movement, which was rights, raises, and respect right now. And we continue to shout that through work and efforts across the country, here in North Carolina for sure. And without further ado, I will turn it over to you, Marissa, with great thanks for all the work and leadership you have done and your center has done throughout many, many years.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm excited to be moderating this panel today, focusing on workforce supports. So we have a great panel and discussion for you that will cover support for educators, program leaders, and programs at national, state, and local levels. So my name is Marissa Schleber, and I'm from the Center for the Study of Childcare Employment at UC Berkeley. So at our center, we conduct research and propose policy solutions aimed at how our nation prepares, supports, and compensates the early care and education workforce. So our focus is on ensuring that we center the experiences, needs, and voices of the ECE workforce in all we do to lift up folks that have historically not had a seat at the table, but about who many policies are designed and enacted. So before we begin, I want to just take a few minutes to ground our conversation and discuss our plans for today. And then I will turn this over to our panel to introduce themselves and their program. And then we will dive into questions about their work. So early childhood professionals are a key component of quality care and for shaping the learning and development of young children. However, even prior to the pandemic, early care and education has been in crisis. So insufficient public investment and a market-based system that relies primarily on what parents can afford to pay has resulted in a system that doesn't work well for children, families, or the workforce. So many early childhood professionals work in conditions that undermine their practice and well-being and earn poverty-level wages that fuel turnover and staffing shortages. So the historical and pervasive undervaluing of labor performed by women, and especially women of color, has created one of the most underpaid workforces in the United States. So only 2% of all occupations earn less than childcare workers. So in 2019, the median wage for childcare workers in North Carolina was $10.62, with poverty rates 7 times higher than teachers in the K-8 system. So early educators in the state with a BA are paid 29% less than their colleagues in the K-8 system. So median wages for directors have gone down in North Carolina from 2017 to 2019 by 5%. So this data is from our 2021 Early Childhood Workforce Index, which is linked in the chat. So in addition to low wages, many educators lack benefits like employer-provided health insurance, retirement, paid leave, and work in programs with insufficient working conditions. So for example, many may not have to pay time for planning. So the pandemic exacerbated existing inequities, both within the field and across early education and K-12 education, and is creating new challenges. So recent BLS data shows that the workforce is 11% smaller than it was at the start of the pandemic. So while recovery is happening, it's happening slowly. So data from a study of early of California early educators and program directors, which mirrors national data, show that the workforce is grappling with economic insecurity and that programs are struggling to hire and retain teachers. However, the pandemic has also highlighted how essential early care and education is for our economy and for children's learning and development. So proposed legislation such as Build Back Better, while stalled, provides hope and has sparked much needed conversation, and many states are using federal relief funds to support their workforce. So when we're thinking about the historically high rates of turnover and workforce shortages in ECE, coupled with a global health crisis that has intensified pre-existing inequities, it's critical to understand the needs of the workforce and how early childhood professionals can be supported, especially as we look forward to imagining a system that works for everyone. So now let's turn to our panel. So Terry, Edith, Hunter, and Alicia, to hear from them how their programs are supporting early childhood professionals. So just a note, please put your questions in the chat, and at the end, we will have time during the Q&A session to address those. So to get us started for today, let's meet our panel. So if you can share with us an overview of your work and why you focused on workforce supports in the way that you did. So Terry, if you can start us off.
Thank you, Marissa. I'm thrilled to be here this morning. I'm Terry Talon. I am with the McCormick Center for Early Childhood Leadership, which is a center at National Louis University, which is primarily located in Chicago, with a few campuses as well in Florida. I have my career started as a lawyer, and then I moved from being a child advocate attorney to being an administrator of an early childhood program, not your usual stepping stones, right, on a career path. Strangely enough, I have found other people who have had that same career path. But for me, I've always been mission driven and wanted to really work to better the lives of children and consequently the lives of the families and communities that they live within. After being a center director for a number of years and learning that I needed to learn a lot about early childhood and getting a master's degree along the way in early childhood education, I joined the university and am also a professor of early childhood education at National Louis. But my passion and the passion and mission of the McCormick Center is about the very important role that the program administrators that oversee and lead early childhood programs play, and they're often neglected in our understanding of the workforce. So I will have more opportunities to go into some greater depth. Some of you may know me from my work as a co-author with administrative rating scales, the program administration scale and the business administration scale for family child care. That was an attempt to, which I think was successful, to actually identify what are the knowledge and skills that program administrators need to have and know in order to lead effective programs. Strangely enough, until there was a tool like the PASS or the BASS, there wasn't a way to actually measure the impact of program leadership in terms of outcomes for children or the quality of programs. So it is like a really important part of who I am and the direction the center has gone in. But by and large, what we want to do is have a laser-like focus on understanding leadership writ large. So it's not just administrators, but it's coaches, it's technical assistance specialists, it's instructors, it's teacher leaders, and family child care providers, as well as center directors that we have focused on for over 35 years. So I'm going to, I could go on I've worked there for 20 some years, so I have a lot of history that I could relate, but I'll try to fit it into some of the other questions coming next.
Okay. Well, Terry, I'll jump right in. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for providing me with this unique opportunity to provide a bit of information about the work of Child Care Services Association and the Teach Early Childhood Scholarship Program in particular. I think I'd be remiss if I just delved into workforce and didn't mention what really is the driving force behind all of the workforce supports that CCSA administers. And that really starts with the child, what children need in order to be prepared for success in later life. So CCSA, as many of you may know, leads efforts on both local, statewide, and national levels to strengthen the accessibility and affordability of quality early childhood education by supporting children, families, and the workforce. The organization engages in a holistic approach in a variety of ways. CCSA in some ways is a conglomerate. We do a little bit of everything. So I think of us, I compare us to a shopping mall where the work is related, but we have distinguishable features that allows us to target specific areas of the early care and education industry. So through our work, we support families, we support providers, and again, we spearhead a lot of initiatives on behalf of the early care and education workforce. Obviously in North Carolina, which is the founding state for Teach Early Childhood. And because of the remarkable success of that initiative some 30 years ago, we have witnessed through the course of time, other states adapt our workforce efforts. So I'm really proud to say for nearly 50 years, CCSA has led a variety of efforts while advocating for accessible, affordable, high quality childcare for children. What's crucial to CCSA's leadership in early care and education systems has been our direct support for early care professionals. Again, that has occurred on local, statewide, and national levels. But ensuring that these professionals are educated and adequately compensated is absolutely key to all children receiving high quality early care and education. And if you followed statistics and the workforce data that's out there, it shouldn't be a surprise that these educators, by and large, are women predominantly, and more than half are women of color. And in the end, sadly enough, in this country, some of them are the workforce in total represent the most poorly compensated professionals that they are. And so through my work, I'm exposed to a lot of conversation about ways to impact communities of color. And while I know we still are grappling with this compensation issue, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, the reality of it is in this country, formal education provides the greatest options for people of color who are most vulnerable to improve their life circumstance for themselves and for their families. So, but I'd also be remiss if I did not acknowledge that Teach Early Childhood is a single strategy, and that CCSA's approach has been comprehensive. And we have brought together a series of other workforce initiatives, some of which you're probably familiar with, the Childcare Wages Salary Supplement Program, and then we have the Childcare Educator Awards Program, both providing salary supplements. Years ago, CCSA was in a very unique position to administer a health insurance strategy. So throughout this pandemic, as we've been on the sidelines hearing about workforce stabilization, and ways to put resources in the pockets of the workforce, health insurance still remains one that kind of gets skipped over. So I'm taking every opportunity I can to bring that and lift that out. It's still one of the gaps and supports that remain out there. But again, without going any further, what I'll say in conclusion is that I too kind of landed in my role somewhat serendipitously. I had the good fortune 30 years ago, and that's really showing my age, of getting connected with CCSA and the Teach Early Childhood Scholarship Program just as it was moving from a pilot to a statewide initiative. And I had no idea that it would have blossomed to where it is now. And that is under CCSA's administrative support being a nationally heralded workforce support and strategy. So I'll stop there. And I'm glad that we'll have time later to get to take deeper dives into all of this.
I thank you all for including us. I'm among some great people that do amazing work. I'm Hunter Vera Papa. I'm the Early Care and Education Director at the Children's Council of Watauga County, which is located in Boone, North Carolina in the mountains. And I started out coming here for college and fell in love with the area and the community, and started out as a nonprofit. We started a nonprofit child development center here in Boone, and I was a director. So it was my first job out of college, the hardest one I've probably had. I wanted to help this community because I loved it so much. And I saw the trials firsthand with teachers, being a director, with families trying to afford it and all of those things. And then I became a pre-K teacher. And so I was an ECE teacher after that. And so I got to be in the classroom and got to see some of the trials and challenges of that, but loved every minute of all of it. And then I came to the Children's Council as the NC Pre-K coordinator once I had my own child, because I was like, teaching wears you out, and I want to have time for my own children. So I came here and started doing a little bit of TA. And really the TA that we were called in to do was around the star rated license system. Somebody would call in and they would say, hey, we're getting ready to go through the star rated license system. Can you come and do a mock assessment? And I would come, and they were going to be rated in 3 weeks. And like, what can we do? What can we do better? And so immediately I kind of saw that it was almost not ethical that I was telling them like what to put into their program and how to make it look good and all of these things. But what I saw was missing was the relationships between the teachers and the children and the materials. And so I was like, there's got to be a better way to help support these programs. And so I found the class tool, and I gained certificate in that. And we started really looking at how to build high quality and maintain high quality in these programs that we were working with. And so we built this program called the Pathways to Accreditation program in 2018, and looked at standards. We created 8 standards, and a lot of them were based off NACCE's accreditation standards. But we saw that a lot of programs, first of all, couldn't afford that. And also they couldn't make the jump to be a BA or a BS in that degree. So we were like, we need to get teachers with an associate's degree in this field, and we need to have them trained in developmentally appropriate practices and all different things that we saw. And so basically what we did, and we were seeing, challenging behaviors, we were seeing all different types of things. So we created this program. There's 8 standards. We have the early childhood education standard, which is gaining their degree. So all lead teachers are working towards or have their associate's degree, and we help them through PD plans in that. We have the physical environment standard, which is like ITERs, ECHRs, FICRs. We help support that and help maintain that as well. So it's not just a one-off and then you wait 3 years and then we're back in there helping you out again. And then health and safety. So we work closely with the DCDEE regulation and our health department. And if there's violations or compliance things, we have such a strong relationships with the programs that are in our program that we work with them, and they notify us like, hey, we just got violated on this. How can we move through these steps to fix this? And we help them out through that too. Relationships is another standard, and that is the one that I was most focused on, because you can have all the materials you need, but if you don't have that relationship and those high quality interactions, then learning is not going to take place. Your classroom can look great, but if you're not engaged, then nothing's really happening. So that's one of them. And then we have our family partnership standard 2. And as a teacher and a director, I saw how valuable those partnerships were with the families. And a lot of times families drop off. They don't really know what's going on in the classroom. They want to know, maybe they don't have time, or maybe it's just not something that the program has ever implemented. And so we help out with that standard as well. And then the curriculum and assessment standard 2 is we noticed people saying that they were using a curriculum, but they really had like one book and they really didn't know how to implement that curriculum. And so we have helped purchase and train and really like help implement the curriculum part of these programs. And then we have a behavior support standard. And so that helps with the like exclusion and suspension that we were seeing for so long of children. And we go in and do observations. We have strategy meetings after the observations with the teachers and directors. And then we go in and we do ongoing support as well. And so we've seen a fall in that too as well. And so this program, we just kind of like homegrown it. It's homegrown, but it's based on a lot of the different things in here. We use parts of the past, we use class, we use different things to monitor and to assist in our program as well. So I'm going to give it to Alicia, and she's going to explain kind of the funding part too.
Yeah, we have like, so what Hunter's is talking about is part of that professionalization of that field. It was very important to us that teachers be able to get professional development like the rest of us do during the course of our workday. We are not usually spending our evenings or weekends after a long day of work doing required professional development, nor are we paying for it ourselves without the support of our organizations. So this is an intense TA program. And we do provide it during the day, and that means we have to provide sub support. So we are funding subs and maintain that sub pool so teachers can attend those training sessions during the day. Well, I'll talk to you a little bit about how we're investing in the wages of those teachers. But the other part of what we're doing, and one of you's mentioned this already, and even Hunter, we do have a learning community for the directors. They do come together on the regular with our staff, and they have formed a community themselves, a support community themselves, so they can share ideas and grow professionally together. They have focused learning topics, but at the same time, they've built relationship and rapport. So if one of them maybe is younger and is experiencing a challenging situation, she now has a group of colleagues that she can turn to for advice and guidance and support while she works with her center. And so that has been, all of those things help to professionalize the field. So in addition to this Pathways to Accreditation program, which is kind of how we do our CCR&R, our childcare resource and referral work here in North Carolina, we also have funds for childcare subsidy. And some of those funds do go to our local childcare subsidy program, which is managed by our DSS, but we do maintain some of those funds in a dual subsidy quality enhancement program. And in order for a center to receive those funds, one thing we do different than the DSS program is we do not fund it by child, we fund it by center. We do believe that that investment in the school makes high quality available to all children in the classroom and addresses an issue of equity in that way. We are providing the dual subsidy to those programs. Those programs that are enrolled in our dual subsidy quality enhancement program have to do two things. They have to agree to be involved in this Pathways to Accreditation program so that the director and the staff are receiving this intense TA around quality. And they have to agree to pay their teachers a minimum of $12 an hour to receive that enhancement. And so in doing so, when you lift the wage of that lead teacher, it shifts the wages up for the entire rest of the staff. When we started this, our average lead teacher in Watauga County was making $9.50 per hour. We forced that to 12 if you're enrolled in that program. And some of the directors in our program are paying 15 and 16, and that's just being kind of driven by the current environment as well. So the centers all had to get on board with that. They were all part of the planning and the creation of that. And we don't have enough money on our own in our county to do that with our Smart Start dollars. So a key was to engage our local leadership, and our county does invest money that we blend with ours to make that program possible. We, of course, want to see our standard go from $12 to $15 an hour. And so we're working with our local leadership to drive some additional funds to make that happen. So our local county government gives us money. We put in our money, and then we also have established in our community an early care and education fund. And a lot of our business community drives significant donations to that fund. And as it grows, it has its own board. We're able to pull down resources from that fund to blend with that as well, so that we can support this local resource.
Great. So thanks for sharing more about yourselves and your programs. It's great to hear about all the different ways that you're supporting early childhood professionals. So what do you think is the biggest opportunity you have when addressing workforce supports?
I'm going to lead off, and I would say that with our focus at the McCormick Center on leaders of programs, the program leaders, I think one of the biggest opportunities we have is understanding that the turnover rate amongst program leaders is significantly lower than the turnover rate for teachers and assistant teachers. So given that, we can make a very strong argument for why it's important to invest in the leaders and build their knowledge and skills and essentially teach the program administrator to catch fish themselves rather than have fish provided from outside, if you follow that metaphor. Teach the leader to fish, teach the leader how to coach their teachers, teach the leaders or support the leaders in growing the skills they already have to be able to really have high performing teaching staff within their programs. Because our experience is, and the research actually supports this, that when you have better prepared program administrators, there's a direct correlation with higher quality program outcomes based on their ERS and their class scores. A little less data on the class scores than the ERS, but for a variety of reasons. The research, though, shows that the quality of the leadership impacts the quality of continuous quality improvement in the organization, which impacts teachers' retention, creates a sense of efficacy for leaders who know how to access funds from multiple places in order to pay their staff more, and it becomes a synergetic system that supports quality. So I do think the lower turnover rate amongst directors helps us see the need for having better prepared program leaders. And when I spoke about PASS and BASS, that was one aspect of our work that has to do with program evaluation, but an equally important part of our work is all around identifying the competencies of program leaders. And we have a framework called the Whole Leadership Framework, which is the basis for all of our leadership development work, including an online director credential called Aim for Excellence. So we really are supporting leaders in a very comprehensive way that's available and relevant no matter what state those leaders are practicing in. So that, I think I'll stop there.
Hey, thanks for setting the stage, Terry. I have actually developed a small tickle in my throat, so I might have to drink some water in case the cough starts. But you know, there's so much to unpack here with this particular question. So it was challenging for me to kind of drill down to create or share a salient message. But you know, as all of the darkness that unfolded on us from the pandemic still continues in many ways, we have a great opportunity here for sure. And I think what this crisis has forced us to do as workforce advocates is to coalesce. Let's look at those common interests and goals that we all share and come together kind of in a united front. There is an opportunity here to identify partners or cultivate new relationships from partners and from sectors who we typically don't work with. And, you know, we always talk about how the business community doesn't understand the needs of workforce or early care and education, and yet we fall short in actually inviting them to the table and keeping them at the forefront of targeted messaging. So that's one thing. But the other opportunity is to connect with the workforce, not see them just statistically, but to actually bring them to the table, allow them to eat the food, because their voices are instrumental in actually explaining for themselves the impact of our initiatives, of our programs, unlike us who as administrators appear to be self-serving in promoting kind of our achievements. So that's another opportunity. I think the last opportunity for me would be, we have an opportunity to get it right. We've had decades of doing it wrong. And as we are all challenged in one way or another to think about workforce pipeline development through apprenticeships, perhaps even through credit for prior learning, let's not be willing to say, we'll do this, but not that. Let's be really clear that we want it all, recognizing that the funding oftentimes comes slowly and incrementally, but coming up with a real blueprint that encompasses a vision for what the workforce can be. And that includes scholarships, absolutely, salary supplements, compensation, but there are so many other supports that our workforce needs that, just go overlooked. Coaching and mentoring, very, very vital, effective strategies that really do go a long way towards recruitment, retention, and providing those enhanced supports that oftentimes aren't included in funding formulas. So I think that's where I'll stop. I love this work and I could go on and on forever, but I think those would be my three big opportunities.
Yeah, it's true. We've just come out of we're still in a 2-year thing where we were at the forefront, and a lot of these things bubbled up for a population that really didn't get to hear about it. And so we do have this big opportunity. And at the local level, we were seeing early care and education programs really struggle through that, which they had struggled before.
Mhm.
But one thing about our program that we have here, the Pathways to Accreditation program, is right before we started in 2018, it's a voluntary program, so people can join up, programs can join up, and they became these cohorts of directors. And so they gained knowledge about each other's jobs, the profession, being advocates for what they were doing, as well as the teachers were in cohorts. So they weren't isolated one teacher in one classroom for 8 to 9 hours a day. They got to join a cohort of other teachers, hearing about the challenges, hearing about strategies that other teachers were using. And so they became a local workforce where they really got to collaborate together and they got to understand. And then when the pandemic hit, we were all here together. We got to meet virtually and we all got to support each other through these times. And we got to really hold them accountable to those meetings. So it is voluntary, but once you're in the program, then you learn how valuable it is. And one part of the accountability is that you attend 75% of the trainings. We pay for your substitute teachers. We make them 2 times or 3 times a day where you can come to those and join in. We gave everybody technology so that they could join in virtually. And they got that ongoing support through the pandemic. And they got to hear what other people were going through and other people cheering them on. So it was really, it's really been beneficial since the beginning, but even through the pandemic, it was amazing to see these directors holding hands. They're not an isolated early care and education program in the western end of our county. They're all together and they're collaborating on this movement locally, and to let other local businesses and local leaders and people that did not, they may have had a child for 5 years in a child care program and that was their 5 years where they were struggling to pay for it or whatever, but their employees were affected. And so it really became forefront of our local community and us collaborating together. So I think that was part of the biggest opportunities here.
Yeah, here locally, our chamber is in a 12-county region that is called the Northwest North Carolina Prosperity Zone, just held their annual workforce development conference. And the business leaders that run that conference made early childhood. We had staff that were on a panel. That was a focused conversation of that economic development conversation for the area. And because they are seeing the impact of a broken system on their workforce, their own workforce, and their ability to hire new talent here in our community. So there is an opportunity there because post-COVID, our local business leaders, and I can't imagine that this is not true across the state, but they're listening and they're willing to make some financial investment in it. The problem is we have a broken system that is so complex. We don't have a clear solution all the time. That isn't just hordes of money, and so sometimes you have a private business owner and sometimes you have a state or federally funded program all in the same sandbox, and so it's a little difficult to have for us to have a clear strategy in front of opportunity that isn't just overwhelmingly cost prohibitive for the private sector. So just interesting to see how we'll take on this challenge.
Thank you. It's been great to hear about all the opportunities. So especially around connecting with the workforce and listening to their voices and their needs. So as we think about equity, how do your programs or initiatives consider equity, and what strategies organizationally have you used to connect equity to your work?
I think it's a disadvantage that I always have to go first. I have to say that because I always feel like, God, I would love to be able to respond to what one of my colleagues has said, but I persevere. I want to say that the framework that I referred to, the whole leadership framework, was weak around culturally responsive leadership practices. Mm-hmm. And one of the things that we have done is create an avenue for hearing voices from people about how to strengthen that aspect of the whole leadership framework and build that into a greater through line through all the competencies that have to do with leadership. So that's one. The other is we have a 2-year funded initiative going on through the McCormick Center called the Building Leaders Project. And that's sort of a play on words, building leaders. We're going to build them up, but it's also about leaders who run buildings, whether they're homes, whether they're schools, whether they're childcare centers. And so the Building Leaders Project created an avenue for developing consensus around a unifying professional framework for early childhood program leaders working in centers, in homes, and in schools. We all accept the fact that all teachers pretty much need to know and do the same things, whether they're working in a school or a home or a center, but we haven't yet considered what would a unifying professional framework look like if we were thinking about the building leaders. And so this 2-year initiative has been exploring this. And just to keep it a little bit streamlined here, this past year we have delved deeper into the consensus recommendations that were arrived at by looking at leaders of color only. And we have solicited and received wonderful feedback through focus groups across the country with leaders who work in schools, Head Start, early Head Start, childcare centers, and family childcare homes around what a unified professional framework for leaders would look like. And so I would say that a lot of our work about equity is about listening to the people who are most effective. So building on what Edith said and you picked up on, Marissa, making sure their voices are not just elevated and heard, but acted on. So the next step in this project will be to make sure that policy recommendations are acted on based on those voices.
Wow. Once again, Terry, I really like coming behind you because you kind of make my follow-up pretty easy to do. But, when I read this question, I kind of took a step back and I'm like, we don't consider equity we challenge ourselves to be able to see it throughout all of our work. And that's not just with Teach wages or awards in North Carolina, but then nationally with the other programs that administer, with the other organizations that administer these initiatives, we hold them accountable through actually, now again, we're gathering data to show their impact in terms of reaching underserved communities, but that's where we have to start. That really establishes at least the baseline, this workforce data that we collect. And then beyond that, we come up with clear strategies for how we are going to provide the respect, supports, and engagement that underserved communities need. So that's first and foremost, but for us, but speaking from an organizational perspective, there are two things that we use as our guidepost. One, we have a set of foundational principles in our organization, CCSA, that really does guide our work. I call them our guidepost, because sometimes it's easy to get kind of mired in the day-to-day, and having these foundational principles readily accessible allows us to kind of step back at any point in time to see if we're on course as an organization, living the spirit of our words, as we share, kind of our vision and mission in a variety of ways. But then the other very effective tool that we developed at CCSA was our strategic planning tool. CCSA is comprised of 6 or so divisions. And so each division has this very targeted task of not only seeing where our work fits in the strategic plan as a whole, but then we're also going through all of our materials and seeing if an equitable lens has been applied in our messaging, in the way that we deliver services and supports. But suffice it to say that equity doesn't necessarily mean that everybody gets the same thing, because everybody may not need the same thing packaged in the same way. So it really requires us to do a deeper dive into data and looking at the story that's missing. Sure, we can talk about, teach outcomes and teach outputs, but there are so many untold stories there that really do capture the challenges of individual women, typically women of color. What is their untold story? And that's where that lifting out of their voices becomes absolutely essential. And, we capture their perspectives. And what's unfortunate is that we put them in this position to be vulnerable and share their souls, right? Bare their souls. And yet the compensation that they so deserve just trails, further and further behind. But equity can't be a check the box kind of item in your organization. We found that to be true. And again, thinking back to these storms and these our country's crises, whether it was, brutality or just historical oppression, we became quite intentional and had to do some real introspection as an organization to see, okay, how do we stand up for issues of equality, issues of oppression, issues of equity, and put that kind of in an overarching way for all of the various works and supports that we provide. So we don't just check equity, we live and breathe it, we internalize it, and then we hold each other accountable so that we can demonstrate that yes, we are taking this seriously, we have internalized it, and it really is a guiding principle for our work.
Yes, and yes to both of you, and thank you for all the work that you're doing at your levels. And what we see at a local level is, we get to be in these programs, we get to know what's going on, we get to know the families, the children, the teachers, the staff. And one thing that we've been able to do is really integrate create trainings based on their needs and know what each program it needs. And one thing that we've been able to do, like this year, our Directors Leadership Academy has been on healthy workplace environment, because we were noticing, well, first of all, we've been through 2 years of a pandemic, but also there were other things way before this that created a toxic workplace environment for teachers, staff, children, families. And so when you create this healthy workplace environment and you teach people about and have empathy towards people and give them the resources that they need, then we can start to heal that, and we can also bring it into these trainings that we're providing for teachers and directors as well, and families as well. And by funding it locally, then we are able to make it a more equitable experience for all of those. Our class, when we're in there doing observations, we get to actually see what is needed. And so we get to really bring that out into our trainings and our cohorts with our directors. We get to hear from staff. They feel really safe and good coming to us when they feel like something is not equal or something is not equitable. And so we're able to address that on like a bigger level with our specific directors in a cohesive conversation with them, and really pinpoint areas of need in these programs. And we also have created, like next year, we have a 3-part series on it that teachers and directors will go through together. So the directors are held accountable to what the teachers are learning, and the teachers as well. So it's not just we're separately doing separate things with both of them. We're bringing them all together too, and hearing their voices and responding with resources and trainings specific to them.
Hunter, you might also tell them about the collaboration with PBS recently. It's a related topic, sort of, but went to address some of these issues with PBS.
Yeah, the PBS, we partnered with them, and we were able to train the teachers and the families in our community based on cultural competence through them as well. And another thing that I forgot is our behavioral support program. So that's part of our standards, is like you are not allowed to suspend or expel or send a child home for reasons. Like we get called first, we come in and do an observation, we offer strategies, we help support the relationship between the families and the teacher and the director. And so that has really been able to help people understand where people are coming from and give the support needed, and give a voice to the child and to the family as well, and to the teachers as well, because a lot of times they don't have the strategies. If they're coming in, with not an associate's degree or even associate's degree, they still don't have those resources to be empathetic and to understand what people need and what families need and what children need. And so we've been able to really like stop it. Like, you are not allowed to send a child home for biting. You're not allowed to send a child home for, these things, and just that education piece behind it, the empathy behind it, and the relationships that we have with people. They're not scared to come tell us. Like, we don't just accidentally hear from a parent that a child has been expelled. Mm-hmm. We hear it from the program. And we have had that happen, but we reach out directly to that program, like, hey, remember, we have this behavioral support program that can really help you out. And so we work with everybody in that. And I think that's been really helpful to families and the children too, and teachers.
So these are all important strategies, and especially the theme that we continue to come back to. So really listening to the workforce, lifting up their voices to focus on their need and responding. So we discussed some of the opportunities in one of our earlier questions, but what are the biggest challenges or barriers you faced in leveraging these opportunities for childcare professionals? So if you can speak more to just some of those barriers or challenges.
I think the biggest challenge is just the lack of staff, the churn of staff, making it so hard for professionals to support their own growth or the growth of others. So in my world, looking at the leadership workforce, getting leaders to a place where they can focus on their own leadership development is really hard. They're in the classroom. They're every day. They're in the classroom because they don't have enough staff. That, you know, it's just extremely difficult to be able. I'm reminded of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Like, you have to have basic, you know, food and shelter before you can focus on some higher level needs. Right now, programs are struggling to survive. So it's often difficult for me and for our organization to help leaders and even funders understand how critical the leader is to the solutions. And so, and you know, I think that that's just a challenge. It's not insurmountable. And one of the things that we have learned is the need to do so much more online at listening to providers and leaders about when they're available, and make sure we're available when they're available, and building the strengths. I really want to support what Hunter said. You know, the ability of the workforce to come together in learning communities is really key. And it doesn't always have to be physically a learning community. That we've all become so much more adept at using Zoom and figuring out how to build learning communities even remotely like this. So it's really hard for me to stay focused on obstacles because I'm a real positive, the glass half full person. It immediately takes me to, like, what do we do about it? So, but we've got to solve the staffing crisis if we're really going to be able to move forward.
So true, Terry. And you stimulated more thinking within me, as always. I like Terry. I tend not to get really mired in the challenges and obstacles. I want to be aware of them, but I just don't let that become my focus. Challenges for me, again, are opportunities, you know, to move beyond. But, you know, if I had to think about a challenge that I'm faced with more often than I really would like to be, one is lack of capacity. That for me, and I'm saying this in my role as the Teach North Carolina program administrator, I wish there was funding for me to have 50 more people actually out doing this hand holding, providing this guidance to recipients, to aspirational early educators. But we operate within the constraints of funding, right? And that's true in many organizations. So until there is a funding allocation for cloning, I think that will forever be a challenge that I will have to continue to think through creatively about how we can provide this kind of high touch support, if you will, to our recipients and aspirational educators in lieu of there being sufficient funding. But, you know, the last challenge that is so troubling for me, and I saw this really become vocalized more as we started to talk about why folks were fleeing early care and education. And they kept using, you know, well, they can go to Hobby Lobby and make $17 an hour. Well, you know, that is true, but that's always been the case with early care and education. We've never been able to compete with these other industries, right? And yet we have built quite a grassroots movement across this country comprised of individuals who were committed to this work. And so I think we have to leverage that. And whenever I hear that, you know, defense or that basis for relaxing, that justification for relaxing on standards, my immediate kind of like reaction that I do not hold back on is to say, but children and families can't wait for the system to catch up with the compensation needs of this field. And so while children are in our care, families are totally dependent on us, on the workforce to enable them to work. We have to take this opportunity to make sure that the value of education in the context of its impact on caring for young children becomes amplified. Again, I'll go back to a point I made earlier that when you start talking about learning gaps for Black and brown young children, you talk about poverty that many Black and brown workforce individuals live in, you know, education, while it's not going to result in grand theft money, we all know that, but it provides options. And their trajectory for having a higher quality of life in this country really, really is extended. And so I'm just pretty staunch in that position. Not saying that everybody who works with young kids needs a degree, but they do need to have some foundational education to do so. So that's the big challenge. Certainly being adept at addressing these compensation gaps, and but at the same time, coming to terms with the ethical struggle that I have as a workforce advocate, and understanding that, yeah, compensation is abysmal, but young children need to be exposed to someone who can carefully and appropriately support them. So, so getting better at the messaging for sure. But then also looking at creative ways to build capacity, so that we can really deliver more high touch interactions with those who really do view us as their lifeline.
Right. I echo both of you. I mean, we all know this, but that's been, again, at a local level, the turnover rate, the staff turnover rate, it highly affects what we're doing here. You know, when we go in and do a class observation and then 3 weeks later, a teacher leaves, then another teacher comes and we do another class observation. Trainings as well, like when we offer professional development around curriculum and they've got, 40 hours paid for training and they get trained for that 40 hours and then they leave or halfway through it. And the thing is, the data collection that we're trying to gather and the trainings that we're trying to get these teachers in, yes, they can go down and get their nails. They can go work at a nail salon and make a lot more money. When I came here, my first early care and education class at Appalachian State, the first thing that the professor said was, if you're in this for the money, go ahead and walk out the door.
Yep.
And everyone stayed because the passion was behind it. And we all have that passion. And what we want to do is continue these relationships with these teachers saying, hey, we are here. We are working behind the scenes. We are trying to, we've raised some wages. We are trying to garner these relationships with each one of you because we know that you want to be here. And so we're going to try to give you that support so you can stay here and you can feel good about this. When the pandemic hit, my family has 2 restaurants. That income was gone. And I was like, I'm still going to do this, and a lot of people are still going to do this. It is passion work. And so really tapping into those passions with these teachers and these directors and, showing how appreciative people are to families, those family relationships, and showing how valuable they are beyond the dollar is really important to people as well. And so that's been a big thing with us. We just had a huge, like the PBS collaboration, they offered a free dinner that was nice and like everybody got recognized, just recognizing these people and being really appreciative. That's one thing that I've learned throughout the years is I always end with appreciation. I start with it, I end with it. And that is so important to people, and to know that they can call you when they are having some kind of issue, because a lot of people, most of the workforce is living in poverty, and to offer all these different resources for them to gather through teach, through wages, through our Pathways to Accreditation program is so important that they know that we're here and we're fighting for them and that they can be an advocate too as well, and that families can be an advocate, and that we're reaching our local community too and business leaders as well. So there's definitely challenges in that. And then also the challenge of, we have one healthy social behaviors person for a region. or for like 9 counties. And that's one person for challenging behaviors in these sites. So locally, we were like, we've got to help out now. And we have 3 people. Well, we have 4 on our team. Each one of us has a designated job, but we all have to pull together to help out because we may have 4 challenges in a week, and so that is doing what you can with the funding, but also, just having those relationships with people is so important. But definitely, funding's always been out there. I mean, since the day I walked into my first early care and education class 20 years ago. So
I have one more thought before we transition to the next question, and that is this recurring challenge of unreasonable expectations as well. For a lot of the impacts of our programs to really be seen, there are immediate impact, and then there's long-term impact, and oftentimes funders want to see immediate results. Well, when you put into context the typical person who's actually working in early care and education, it's a process. This transformative change happens over time. It's not going to happen within one funding cycle typically. And so really the challenge is helping funders, policymakers to see that and to give them some sense of what this initial investment can demonstrate over a period of time, and to be patient. So again, just helping them kind of, give us a chance to demonstrate impact and the effectiveness of these programs.
I'm going to jump on what you're saying and add another challenge, and that is the challenge of looking for the one silver bullet. Though I hate to use that word, excuse me, but the idea that there's one solution only, and at one time it was the teachers all have to have a BA, and you understand the issue, right? That there's just one thing, and if we just jump on the bandwagon of that one solution, we're going to get there. Well, things are way more complex than that. And one of the things, so sort of what you're saying, Edith, about having reasonable expectations, I think the idea that we are going to build the workforce and immediately see change is negating all the other things that are impacting what's going on in communities. And so even if by some miracle we had the ability to get everybody to that associate degree level and working towards a BA, we'd still have a lot of problems if that was the only thing that we did.
Oh, absolutely.
So communities and centers and staff need to be looked at in a more ecological way of understanding nested contexts. And I think that that's really an important piece to say. I want to just mention that some years ago, we did a workforce study in Illinois. It came out after the national workforce study and the controversies that it raised. And one of the things that was really interesting, I don't remember the exact percentages, but that whereas there was huge turnover in the workforce, in the teaching workforce, and some programs had more than 100% turnover, meaning every teacher left in the course of 1 year. But others, a significant portion of the programs had no turnover. And so, when you come up with these averages, it masks the variability within that average to say that the turnover rate is 33% or whatever it is right now for teachers. Because if you look closer and you say, why do a third of the programs have no turnover when they're basically paying the same wages? Something else is going on here. And so I urge you in North Carolina and people from wherever you are to look closer at those turnover statistics and do not oversimplify and put everything into compensation.
Right. I think, in your conversation this morning, Terry, I keep hearing you talk about leadership. And I think while that is both tangible and intangible, and I think about it as, folks start, when they call and say, well, the Teach Scholarship didn't do this or didn't do that. Teach is a strategy. It
Yeah.
is not a replacement for strong leadership within any organization or program. And so you're absolutely right in that leadership development has to become more of a focus, and that when you see a program providing similar wages or compensation in comparison to another, and yet it is experiencing dramatic turnover, unlike the other program, there is a lot more to that story. And I think I would love to see directors, while they are stressed to the max themselves with a lot of competing demands, that we help them start looking at themselves objectively, to try and understand and articulate what their needs are. And I personally don't think that turnover is always a bad thing. Sometimes it's healthy, and it actually bodes in the best interest of children and families. So.
Yeah, and we see that, like, by having these relationships with these directors and with these teachers, like we noticed, a year ago, or even beyond that, healthy workplace environments. If you are in a place where you feel valued, you feel psychologically safe, you feel like you want to be there, and these are your family and friends that you're surrounded by, you don't want to leave. It doesn't matter what you're making. I got offered another job and I was like, no, I love coming to work every single day. I never want to leave here, because we've created this amazing workplace environment where I feel good every morning when I wake up. But if you don't feel good and you feel not psychologically safe, or things are going on where you're not that tight-knit community who cares and nurtures each other, then they're going to leave and they're going to go to that other program, even if they pay less. I mean, it's like,
I've seen that too.
Oh, yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and it's about, so I would see that as just an opportunity that we can make this investment in healthy workplace training for this population. Also, for us, we're challenged, all those things, shortage in staffing, shortage in finding subs, all the things that, sort of keep what we do have in place afloat, but also challenged to talk to our local leadership and our community at large about thinking about, we know education begins at birth. We're have been helping for years, our community understand brain development and the precious window of time that early childhood is. And so now that, we know this, this is not new news to anybody. We've been talking about this for a while, understanding that because education begins at birth, education is not only about the K-12 system, and a lot of these problems that we're talking about won't get addressed until we think about early childhood as part of that larger education funding pie, the amount of money that we're driving per child into K-12 education. What would it look like if we could do that on the early childhood side of the fence? Again, we're in this, it's different because a lot of care of young children happens within the context of the family, as it should. So how do we drive those dollars to invest in families who are caring for their children, and friends, family, neighbor care, what you would call, as well as in the licensed childcare setting, which again is sometimes funded with government dollars and sometimes it's a private business enterprise, and we've been throwing all kinds of this new money at it, this new COVID money, but there's a cliff to that money. So how do you tell the private business owner who was already operating on a margin where she couldn't exist and maybe probably wasn't paying herself all the time, and say, yeah, we want you to drive up these wages. Oh, and we're only talking about wages. What about benefits and all the other things that the rest of us enjoy? Well, we want you to drive up these wages with this now money. And she knows that in 2 years, well, what do I do? Because she also cares about the parents that she's serving and knows that they can't afford more to cover that gap that's going to exist. So we're in a we're in a delicate place, and it's a shuffle game, and so really challenging our local community to think about, we're talking about this being part of the educational pie here. And we're not talking about taking any money away from K-12. We're talking about the mirror of K-12. Like, what does this community invest in K-12? Can we also invest that in early childhood? And what are all the things that could look like? So.
Yes, this was a great conversation. So I definitely appreciated, right? There's no one solution, so no single ingredient. And so a lot of my work focuses on early educator work environment. So it's great to hear that come up as well. Edith, also hearing that challenges are just opportunities to move beyond. I thought that was great as well. So just in the interest of time, we have one more question for our panel before we will jump into our Q&A session. So as you work towards these opportunities, what are ways the audience can help increase workforce supports? So how can the audience get involved?
Well, without knowing really who's in the audience,
Yeah.
which is a little bit of a challenge, I'm going to presume the audience is made up of passionate early childhood professionals. And how they can get involved is, one, advocate with everyone, their neighbors, their families, their legislators, their elected officials, their bureaucrats, wherever level of government, with the fact that early childhood is a public good and that it needs to be invested in the same way we invest in K-12 education, the way we invest in infrastructure for roads and bridges. Our children are our greatest resource, and we need to invest in them. So that the advocacy message has to be at the top of what each person who's in this audience can do. And then on a non-advocacy level, I think that if you are a provider of services, think about how you're supporting your staff, and think about think about the ways, small and large. So yes, great, find ways to increase your revenue so you can pay people more, but think about appreciation, as Hunter brought up. Those little ways in which staff are appreciated really go a long distance with the work environment. Everything doesn't have to be big and expensive, though lots of things are big and expensive, and I want to be honest about that. But appreciation matters. This is just a really quick story. Yesterday, I had to pick up my car from the repair shop where it was being fixed from a little dent in the side. And when I picked it up, they had cleaned the car, not just the outside, but the inside. And I was like, oh my God, I cannot tell you how much I appreciated it. And I was thinking, they don't know how much I appreciate this, but it just made me feel so good. And I think about the little ways that we can appreciate staff working in our organizations, teachers, being kind to them, taking the time to find out what's going on in their lives. So from the little to the top, those are the things that how you all can be involved. And I hope that this session has motivated you to do that.
I'm gonna jump in front of somebody because there's somebody in the chat, Linda Black. I'm calling you out. It appears to me that she is a parent. She may also be a professional in the industry, but in her comments, she presents as a parent and saying, thank you for having me. I'm passionate about livable wages for the magic marker educators who have instructed my kiddos. So she believes in the people who taught, the professionals who taught her children, and she values this as a parent. What a great advocate you are. And that phrase, magic marker educators, I have not heard that yet, but how awesome. Once you take, if you've got a kid in your life who's in an early childhood program, take that teacher a bouquet of magic markers with a little note that says you are magical. That just spurred that with just seeing Linda's comment. And so just show your appreciation building on that. I love that.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
So Terry, you've done it again. Advocacy, advocacy, advocacy. That is really at the forefront for me as a strategy in which the audiences could get involved. But you need a very carefully planned advocacy strategy that crosses over many audiences and occurs in a variety of modalities. That being said, once you get your message kind of ironed out, then let's see how we share it. I have come over the past 2 years to really, really enjoy technology and its usefulness. But I'm never going to be a big Twitter. Okay, I'm not a tweeter. I'm just not that, but I value it. So let's look to those in our communities, our relationships, and let them take that on if it's not in your wheelhouse. But it can't be just a singular way, this advocacy effort, and it can't be just short term. You know, in a number of states that we support through the Teach National Center, I always know when legislative session is starting because they look to us and they say, so we have a legislator who wants to know about this and wants to know about that. And I'm thinking that messaging should be happening continually. It should be ongoing, almost to the point that you saturate your communities with a new fact. Because if we wait until legislative sessions are convened, we've lost so many opportunities to continue to communicate and share these stories and advocate on behalf of the workforce. So those would be my recommendations. Definitely continue advocacy, well-planned advocacy strategies and efforts, but then don't put them on the shelf. Make sure there's also a plan in place where the messaging is targeted and that it is occurring on a continual basis.
Right. Don't stop. That you
Don't
can't
stop.
stop.
Don't
And
stop.
you know, a lot of times I'm like, I became this person where my work stops when I walk out of the door to be a healthy person, but it does not stop. And the more people that I can tell my story to and other people's stories to that are not in this world that we're advocating in, and we've got these coalitions and all this, is telling the real estate agents, like, do you want a healthy community? Do you want people to want to move here? This is what you've got to do for the children and the teachers of this community. You know, getting the people that aren't always at the table to the table and not stopping, you know, and reminding them, you know, sometimes I had a hard time telling, you know, what I do. I didn't want to like toot my horn, like, this is what I'm doing all the time, you know, but we have to do that. And we have to also let teachers know, reach out to your family, friends, you know, and it's just, it became upfront during the pandemic. Don't let it go now. Like this is our jumping point where we can really continue on with this advocacy. And yes, advocacy is huge. And also, yeah, just continuing on with it. And, you know, we just had like a supper club, one of our first supper clubs. We're going to start doing this like with different groups of people in our community and different people hosting it and telling their friends about it at the local level. And that one thing I told this one real estate agent that I've known about what we do, she handed me a $2,000 check. I'm like, okay, this is what I'm talking about. I need to talk about this more. I need to give you those heartfelt, pull your heartstrings things where these teachers are going through, what these children are going, families, like this is what we need. And we need that for legislators. We need it for county commissioners. We need it for everybody across the board. So don't stop. You just, yeah.
Well, thank you, panel. So I have asked a lot of questions over this past hour and a half. So I will, so if the audience, if you have any questions that you would like to ask the panel, please either use the chat or the Q&A, and I'll give a minute for you to do so. If
And
not,
one
I have, sorry, Hunter.
And one thing that I wanted to mention earlier is, you know, helping directors be appreciative and creating that healthy workplace environment. You know, there's the trick where you put 5 pennies in your pocket with a child that may be like exhibiting a lot of challenges, and every single little thing that you notice about them, you put a penny in your pocket. And by the end of the day, you want those 10 pennies in the other pocket. And so you want to make sure that everybody on staff in early care and education, in your community, know how much you appreciate that, and appreciate families, and appreciate donors, and appreciate legislators, and appreciate, it's just going to take a lot of pennies, and we're just going to keep doing it, to let people know that they're recognized and we value every single part of this to bring it up.
Yeah, and I feel in some ways I've become somewhat distanced from the on the ground happening. So I really do try and provide leadership and direction for my staff. But one thing that I started doing, complete intentionality during the early days of COVID, and as we were hearing all these stories, we were trying to reach out proactively to find out where our scholarship recipients were and what was happening with them, is that they were absolutely so grateful that you reached out with concern and with an offer of optimism. That just, oh my God. Honestly, I actually had an opportunity to do some of that because I believe that you lead by example, even with your own staff. And I tell you, there were some interactions that just were both heart-wrenching, but it was this sheer appreciation that someone took time out of their day to care. And I know this is all sounding very mushy and all of that, but it is so true. So while I know that everyone on this panel has a lot of juggling, a lot of hats that they're wearing, there is just extreme gratification that also you get when you just can carve out a few minutes just to reach out and just say, hi, I just want to take time to say hello, and that I think you're doing an amazing job, and thank you for hanging in there. Just amazing responses to that kind of unexpected conversation and interaction. And I love it because at heart, if I could go back in time, I would never have stopped being a counselor. Trust me, that was my passion for sure. So I try and connect at that level as much as I can.
So Edith, when I get off of our session today, I'm going to call up my repair shop and thank them for going that extra distance, because it's not enough that I feel it. I need to pay it forward and let them know how important it is.
Exactly.
So thank you. I know this is a nice high fuzzy note, but I wanted to say that one of the things, because we didn't get to all of our questions, and thinking about what we're hoping to accomplish moving forward in the next year or two, I just want to put it out there, especially for people who may know my work through the program administration scale. One of the things, we have a new version of the PASS coming out this fall. And one of the things that you will notice if you have been familiar with the tool is some emphasis on more domains of whole leadership, the more cultural competence, but also understanding that leaders that need to do it all, who need to coach their staff and who create a positive work environment through appreciation and a lot of other things, it's demanding for one person to do it all. So you'll see in our new tool that we're building in the concept of ratios. How many qualified administrators do you need to be able to really support a well-functioning staff based on, is it the same for a program with 60 kids as it is for a program with 150 kids? We don't have any sense of scale relative in our licensing, even in accreditation. And so you're going to see it there for the first time in the past, and I'm sure it will be controversial, but this is what I look forward to, is like understanding we need a leadership bench if we're going to appreciate our staff and do all the hard work that's involved. So I will leave it at that.
And just to touch on what you said or add to it, I have always appreciated North Carolina Partnership for Children, state level and in the local levels, for their attempts to provide funding And again, we saw this more as QRAS was starting to take off, but leadership development was really a clear strategy that was funded. And you saw then administrators coming together. There was such an esprit de corps, and they engaged in this peer-to-peer learning. And you will never be able to capture that impact through any data collection system. And so, of course, as funding formulas changed and funding constraints continued, I saw some of that disappear. But I remember being invited to go and talk to these groups about education and what it means to model that for teachers and staff and programs. And I just hope that there is an opportunity for that to be revisited and for communities, local communities, to understand that that director presence, that director leadership really is the linchpin to quality, because they're the gatekeeper. And I just hope we can get back to that point in time. I get very nostalgic when I start thinking about what now I call the good old days. But in the 90s, there was this synergy, there was this forward movement, and I would love to recapture some of those days.
Well, this has been a great conversation. I can't believe that we're almost at time. So we have about 2 minutes left. So I just want to thank the panel so much. It was so interesting and great to hear about the different ways in which your programs are supporting early childhood professionals, listening to the workforce, so both educators and leaders lifting up their voices, appreciating them. So that was such an important point that we discussed today, and also lifting up resources and capacity. So while we are in a childcare crisis with teacher shortages, the pandemic has shed light on many issues, but also presents an opportunity to focus on the needs of the workforce, whose needs have so often been overlooked. And the panel brought up so many ways today in which to do that. So I just want to express my appreciation and thank you again to the panel. This has been such a great discussion, and thank you for having me moderate this discussion.
Thank you. I for one, really enjoyed it.
I want to just pause and say too, we have an opportunity to celebrate, because when we talk about you're looking back on the past, Edith, and how it was. I mean, we have to recognize that as a system, an early childhood system in our state, with the development of the star-rated licensing system and those very basic things, and the investments in Smart Start in our state. And every community I've worked into, but when I talk to my peers, I know it's more than my two. The average star rating of the childcares in those communities was like between 1 and 2, not acceptable. And now, because of these investments we've made all the time, I mean, I just think I'm part of the Smart Start network, so I say Smart Start can toot its horn, but so can all of our early childhood colleagues, that most of us now, the majority of children are being cared for in 4- and 5-star facilities.
That's right.
And we've grown that. And we've done an incredible lift in that time. And now the lift, what needs to be lifted, or what needs our focus, can shift to what it needs to be now to respond to the current need of the workforce, because that was the need then. And look what we did.
Right.
And there's such opportunity to build on that, and to drive funding to build on that work that we've been doing. So I just want to celebrate that and say, let's go.
Let's go, girls. But we need an early care and education historian for North Carolina, again, to just show the growth. Because I mean, I personally entered this field in the 80s when we were still like, the focus was on staff child ratios, and to see, now quality be inclusive of teachers and PD, it's just been phenomenal. Again, we can't get complacent, because there's always, each new day presents an opportunity to make it better in some way. So yeah, I totally agree with you, for sure.
I was gonna say a huge thanks to Marissa for your incredible moderation, but I think these panelists may just take off without you. So you they are on a roll, but I absolutely love it. All of your words, Edith, Alicia, Hunter, Terry, Marissa, Thank you. Thank you so much for being here with us today. It was incredible. Participants, thank you for the feedback, questions, thoughts, comments in the chat, especially from our parents. It's incredible to feel that support as a parent, but before being a parent, being an early childhood educator myself, really love it. And I love hearkening back to the olden days. You made me feel better, Edith, about talking about, marching through the streets with our rights, raises, and respect. But you bring such passion and power and expertise in your voices and words. And I'm just deeply appreciative to be and honored to be a colleague of all of yours. So thank you again. And the sessions are being recorded and are getting posted as they become available. So keep an eye out for those. And a final shout out to our wonderful communications team, Jessica, Yvonne, and Eric. Thank you for hosting these sessions and a wonderful 2022 Smart Start Conference. Have a good rest of your Thursday, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you
Take
all.
care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.